Hi, I'm Liv from NeuroStitches, and today we're going to cover the crochet waistcoat stitch and the free pattern tutorial for the adult size Thanks It's Crochet hat based on the waistcoat stitch. So if you like the look of modern knitwear, but you don't know how to knit, you only know how to crochet, this is definitely the stitch for you. So please stick around, like and subscribe, and be sure to pick up your ad-free PDF version of the Thanks It's Crochet hat pattern. It also covers how to do the chunky size adult hat version here, like I'm wearing, and baby, toddler, and child sizes. And let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to go through the tips and tricks of working with the waistcoat stitch. Second, we'll go through in slow motion how to do the waistcoat stitch and also how to work decreases with the waistcoat stitch. Then it will be followed by the free version for the adult sized Thanks It's Crochet hat pattern tutorial. So first, let's go into what materials you will need to make the Thanks It's Crochet hat. Okay, so what you're going to need first is one skein of Malabrigo Rios or any worsted weight yarn of your choice. Now, if you would like to do two colors like I've done in this sample here, you're going to want to get two different skeins. But one skein should be plenty enough if you want to do just a single color. Next, you'll need a pair of scissors. A stitch marker is optional, but I find it helpful. A tapestry needle, a tape measure, and this is optional as well. If you want to make a pom-pom beanie, I use this one from Clover. All the links to everything will be down in the description below. Also, the candle is optional, but recommended. So first we're going to begin with an introduction to the waistcoat stitch. And I'm just going to briefly go over the different ways to do the waistcoat stitch, but mainly I'm going to focus on showing you how to do the waistcoat stitch for this particular pattern. And so if you are already familiar with the waistcoat stitch and you want to just get to the pattern specific stuff, go ahead and click the timestamp below to jump ahead to that part of the video. Because this section will not have pattern specific stuff. It will just be tutorial about how to do the waistcoat stitch. So I just want to cover a few tips before we get started with the waistcoat stitch. So the very first tip, and this is the most important thing, you're going to hear me say it a dozen times throughout this video, but you need to have loose tension when working with the waistcoat stitch. So for example, you want to make a mindful, conscious effort to have a looser tension than you normally do. So for example, I usually hold my yarn like this, so wrapped around my pinky and my pointer. But when I work with the waistcoat stitch, I don't wrap it around either. I kind of work with it, like this, very loose. I don't wrap it at all, because you want to have loose tension. So you may need to adjust the way that you hold your yarn. Just for this stitch. So the second tip in working with the waistcoat stitch is to have a pointy crochet hook, because it makes getting into the stitch, the V here, a lot easier if you have a pointed hook. I mean, it really makes a difference. So a good example of a pointed crochet hook to use is the Tulip Etimo Red. It's decently pointy. It's definitely not as pointy as the O'Fire Company hooks. I love these hooks because they're gorgeous, but also I always use these when working with the waistcoat stitch because that's the pointiest crochet hook I've come across personally. If you do know of other pointy crochet hooks, I'm always on the lookout, so drop a comment below and let me know. But I find that these hooks, I absolutely love these hooks. They're gorgeous, but also they make working with the waistcoat stitch so much easier. So if you haven't tried these out, I highly recommend them. I have a link at the bottom of this video. It's an affiliate link, so at no additional cost to you, it just helps support NeuroStitches, our group, and our community. So it really makes it so much easier when working into the tight waistcoat stitch. The next tip I would say is to work with a hook that is larger than what the yarn label suggests. So for example, if the label on your yarn suggests you use a 5mm crochet hook, I would use a 6mm crochet hook. That just helps with loose tension when working into tight stitches like the waistcoat stitch. The final tip I have with working with the waistcoat stitch, we'll go over this more, but turning your work, so while you're working on it, turning your work to see where your hook is going to go. So it helps you ensure proper hook placement, which is the key with the waistcoat stitch. So so here is the front of a normal waistcoat stitch from the front of your work. If you flip it over to the wrong side, here's that same stitch, and this is what it looks like from behind. And you can actually see where your hook should go. So right here in between these back post legs. So inserting your hook into the waistcoat stitch, and then you can see right there, that's where your hook should go. So that is just a really helpful way when you're starting off with the waistcoat stitch. If it's a new stitch to you, I found that that's really helpful when you're crocheting, is just to check the placement before you insert your hook. So when you turn it over, okay, that's the right spot. Until you get a feel for the waistcoat stitch, because eventually you are going to be able to feel the stitch and insert your hook and know without looking, without turning over your work, that it's the correct placement. That's just a tip for beginners to this stitch. Let's get started. So as you can see here, there are 3 different ways of doing the waistcoat stitch. So this is what the waistcoat stitch looks like in a traditional crochet back and forth, turning your work. So the one nice thing about this way is your fabric here, look at this, it's basically reversible. So if you ever need something designed where it's, the front and the back are the same, this is a great stitch for doing that. But we are not doing that for this video. I just am showing you for illustration purposes as a basic introduction to the waistcoat stitch. The second way is to use it in the round like this. You could also use this stitch as an alternative to doing amigurumi, although it's a shorter stitch, so it won't translate perfectly over. So if you try to do a amigurumi pattern that's designed using a normal single crochet stitch, it won't translate over perfectly. You would have to make some adjustments. But if you're designing your own amigurumi, it's a nice stitch to keep in mind. But we are not using this method today either. The final way, this is the way that we are going to make our hat. So this is in the round, and how this is accomplished is chaining, so making your chain. Then I do a row of single crochet into the back bump, and then I start my waistcoat stitches. And so you'll see here, so if you look at the back here, there's a little bit of a gap and a seam. I will go over in the pattern specific part of the video why we use this and how to accomplish this type of join. So we will go over that later in the video for the pattern specific portion. For this part of the video, I just want to cover how to do the waistcoat stitch and how to decrease a waistcoat stitch. So grab your yarn and your hook. And again, this is not pattern specific, so there's not a set number of chains or anything to do. This is just practice. So make a slip knot like you normally would. Because this is demonstration, it doesn't really matter how long your starting tail is. And you're going to make a chain like you usually would. So just chain a good number of stitches that feels right for you. Okay. So we have our chain here, front, back. So with a traditional, like the traditional crochet method of starting your first row or round is to crochet here into that top loop of your chain. However, we are not going to be doing that for this, for the waistcoat stitch. For the waistcoat stitch, I find it much easier to, instead of inserting your hook here, to turn your work a little bit and actually crochet into those back bumps. So right here and right here. So just like with the normal chain method, we always are going to skip that first chain from your hook. So here's the loop on your hook, which never counts. Here's the first chain from your hook. We always, when we're doing single crochet, are going to crochet into that second chain. And so instead of putting our hook here, we're going to turn our work a little bit and go into the second chain's back bump, which is right here. So let's go ahead and do that. So turn your work a little bit, insert your hook into the back bump, yarn over, pull up a loop, and you want to make sure that you have loose tension. So you want to pull up that loop pretty high. Yarn over, pull through the 2 loops. Again, here we're just doing a normal single crochet into the back bump. So we haven't started the waistcoat stitches just yet. Okay, so we're coming up here at the end of our first row. Okay, so we have our first row here, and this is the reason that I prefer doing a single crocheting into the back bump of the chain, because it kind of sets up your V's already a little bit easier for you. Whereas with a traditional chain, it would not really look like this. It makes it a lot more difficult to do the second row, which is going to be the first row of the waistcoat stitch. So with the waistcoat stitch, as you'll see, we are going to be crocheting into the center here, right here. So with a traditional, normal single crochet, usually we are working here, putting in this space here and going under both loops, or if you're doing, a back loop only, it would be through here. But with the waistcoat stitch, we're going to insert our hook here. And I call this, I'm not sure if this is the official terms or not, but this is the front V, and then these 2 lines here are, I call the back post legs. You can see that space right there. That's where you're going to insert your hook for the waistcoat stitch. So setting up the waistcoat stitch just makes it a little bit easier when you crochet into the back bump. Also, it's kind of an aesthetic choice as well, because as you can see here, we've crocheted into the back bump of the chain, so we've made this bottom chain here a little thicker versus our sample here. This sample, I did the traditional crochet chain. So doing the first row is a single crochet into the top loop, the front loop of your chain. And as you can see, it's a lot thinner. You can see that it's a lot thinner here. Let's do a side by side. So it's kind of an aesthetic design choice too. So if you want a thinner one like this, like a thinner brim, if you're not going to be folding up the hat, that's perfectly acceptable. You can go ahead and do that. I like this, and I also find that it's stretchier, whereas this is a little, more rigid. So it's certainly, you can definitely do the waistcoat stitch with the traditional crochet method of single crocheting into the chain loop. However, for this pattern and for this stitch, I find that it makes life a lot easier, and it's a nice aesthetic choice if you crochet into the back bump of the chain. So now the next step that we're going to do is we're going to join the two ends, and then we'll begin working. And again, I'm not going to go over the join method right now. I cover that later in the video in the pattern specific section. I'm just focusing right now on the waistcoat stitch. Okay, so we've skipped ahead here, and I'm going to now show you how to do the waistcoat stitch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do it first, and then like a few example stitches, and then I will break it down and we'll go step by step slowly. So how to do the waistcoat stitch. We're going to insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Let's see that one more time. Insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So, as we went over earlier, the difference between a single crochet and a waistcoat stitch is where you insert your hook. So, with a single crochet, normally we would be inserting our hook here. But with the waistcoat stitch, we want to insert our hook between the front V and the back post legs. So right there. So I like to, especially when you're first starting off with this stitch, insert your hook a little bit. So don't push it through all the way. Insert a little bit and then turn your work over. You can just check to make sure that your hook placement is correct before, inserting your hook all the way. So here we see the back post legs here, and this is exactly where your hook should be. So once we see that that's where it should be, we can go ahead and push through, yarn over, pull up a loop high. You want to make sure that you're pulling up that loop high because you want to have loose tension with this stitch. So yarn over, pull through 2 stitches. Pull through 2 loops. So let's do this again together. Okay, so we see the front V, the back post legs. So let's insert our hook. Kind of got a feel. That feels right. So I'm going to flip over my work to check. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and push through, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull it up high for loose tension. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Let's do it one more time together. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. And the one thing that I do want to emphasize is that you don't have to flip your work over every time. That's just kind of a tip when you're getting started. Like if you haven't ever done the waistcoat stitch before, you eventually get a feel for it. So you're not going to have to be staring at it and flipping it over at every stitch. You eventually get a feel for it and where your hook is and stuff. You want to make sure that you have loose tension, because if you don't, it will make the stitch a lot more difficult, frustrating, it'll take longer, and it'll make your hands and your joints fatigued. On that note, I will say, so right now, we are on our second round total, but this is the first round in which we're doing the waistcoat stitch. No matter what project you're doing with the waistcoat stitch, whatever the first row or round of completing the waistcoat stitch is always going to be a little more difficult than any subsequent rows. And the reason for that is because right now we are crocheting a waistcoat stitch into a regular single crochet stitch. Whereas after this, and I'll show you this and highlight this later on, after this row, we are going to be crocheting a waistcoat stitch into a waistcoat stitch. And as you can see, it's a lot easier to see and to insert your hook. Because here, so look at the comparison here. Here is where we would be crocheting, the next third round, we would be crocheting into this stitch, this waistcoat stitch. Whereas here, this is a regular single crochet stitch, and it's already more difficult to see, to find. It's a lot easier. And you can really fly through this stitch once you get the hang of it and after the first row. So the first row or round of the waistcoat stitch that you do, just hang in there, power through. It is so much easier afterwards. So if you know that ahead of time, it makes the stitch a little bit easier to handle, and also, it lets you know that the whole project is not going to be like this. If you do not have loose tension, it's going to make the stitches very tight, because it's naturally a tight stitch. So if you don't have a loose tension, you're going to be fighting with it the whole project, and that's just not pleasant for anyone. And I feel like the waistcoat stitch has gotten a bad reputation for that too. A lot of people don't like this stitch because it's a short stitch. It takes a lot longer to work up than other stitches, such as the double crochet. So a lot of people don't like it for that. It takes a lot longer. And then also, if you don't have loose tension, it makes the stitch a lot more difficult to work with. So, but as long as you make a conscious, mindful effort to keep your tension loose, you really can get into a groove with this stitch. And I love this stitch. I love the knit look that it gives, and also for practical purposes, it's nice because it's great for mittens or like an oven mitt, pot holder, washcloth, that kind of thing, because it's not it doesn't create a lacy fabric like a lot of crochet stitches do. So there are practical reasons to using the waistcoat stitch as well, in addition to, if you love the knit look and stuff and you want to recreate that as a crocheter. Okay, so we are on our third round total. We're about to start our second round of the waistcoat stitches. So, and I want to show you this just to show and highlight the difference of how much easier it is after your first round or row of the waistcoat stitch. So here we go. So it's so much easier. It's a lot quicker. You can feel the difference in the hook placement and stuff. Your hook just glides a lot quicker, and as long as you keep continuing to have your loose tension, this is how it can and be for the rest of your project. So it makes life a lot easier. So this second round of the waistcoat stitches, but third round overall, is going by so much quicker than the very first round. And that's just because it's a lot easier to waistcoat stitch into a waistcoat stitch. So next, after we finish this third round, we're going to go over how to decrease when working with the waistcoat stitch. So let's go ahead and fast forward. So now we are starting our fourth round, and in this round we are going to go over how to decrease the waistcoat stitch. So for this just example, we're just going to do a basic waistcoat stitch, decrease, waistcoat stitch, decrease, repeat throughout the round. So let's do our first waistcoat stitch. Insert, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So a regular waistcoat stitch. So now we are going to decrease. So the standard way of decreasing single crochet stitches is to insert under both loops, pull up a loop, insert under both loops of the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all. So that's what a normal single crochet decrease would look like. But we are working with a waistcoat stitch, and so we want to do a decrease waistcoat stitch. And how we do that is very similar to how we approach the waistcoat stitch. So instead of inserting here, we're going to insert our hook like we're doing a normal waistcoat stitch. So in between the V's, in between the V and the back post legs. So insert your hook like you're doing a normal waistcoat stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and again, still pull it up high, loose tension. So now we have 2 loops on the hook. Okay, so now insert into the next waistcoat stitch as if you're doing a normal waistcoat stitch. Yarn over, pull up a loop, again, pull it high. You'll have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through all 3. And that's what a decreased waistcoat stitch looks like. So let's do a few more together. So we're going to do a normal waistcoat stitch. Okay, now we're going to do another decrease. So act like you're doing a normal waistcoat stitch. 2 loops on your hook. Insert into the next stitch. Yarn over, pull up a loop. Again, make sure you're pulling them up high. So 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through all 3. Normal waistcoat stitch. Decrease 1. Decrease 2. Yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. So we're going to keep doing this to the end of the round. And then I want to show you, because this is something that I struggled with when I first started with this stitch, how to subsequently crochet into that waistcoat stitch decrease stitch. I'm not sure if that makes sense right now, but it will once we get to the next round. So I will fast forward and meet you at the next round. Okay, so we are at the end of the 4th round. So we have 4 rounds completed. Now we are going to start our 5th round, where I'm going to show you how to crochet into that decreased waistcoat stitch from the previous round. So let's go ahead and do, this is just a regular waistcoat stitch into a regular waistcoat stitch. Okay, and here's our first waistcoat stitch decrease. So as you can see, it basically, the decrease, it takes the 2 V's from the separate stitches and pulls them together as one. So we want to make sure, let me get my scissors to point this out because it's a lot easier. So we want to make sure that we are placing our hook in between the center of both V's. And so here, again, sometimes it's helpful to stretch it out or pull it with your fingernail there. Here, it's in between both V's and the back post legs. So this is where we are going to insert our hook. And I will also show it to you from the back. That way you can check your work. Okay, so let's insert our hook into the center of both V's and the back post legs. And then you can turn your work a little bit and then look, perfect. That is exactly where your hook should be. So go ahead and push through, yarn over, pull up a loop. Again, pull it up high for loose tension, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So let's do another together. So regular waistcoat stitch into a regular waistcoat stitch. Okay, and now we're going to do a regular waistcoat stitch into a waistcoat stitch decrease. So again, find the center of the V's and then the center of the back post legs right there. Okay, so insert your hook. Whoops. And then to check your work, perfect. So push through, yarn over, pull up a loop high, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So let's do a few more together. So that's a waistcoat stitch into a regular waistcoat stitch. And then here we're putting a waistcoat stitch into a decrease. One more. Okay, and I just want to take a second now and just show you what the fabric now looks like. So here's a decrease, and here's the subsequent waistcoat stitch afterwards. So this is what your stitch and fabric will look like. And also, just kind of as a tip, I like to use a variegated and speckled yarn anytime I'm doing decreases like this, just because it helps kind of hide them and disguise them a little bit. I don't think it's very obvious. Like there's not, you can't really feel a difference in the fabric, so it's not like it's like extremely thick wherever the decrease is or anything. But it's just one of those things where if you use a variegated or speckled yarn, you really can't see where the decreases are at all, which is really nice about this stitch. So now that we've gone over the basics of the waistcoat stitch, let's begin the pattern tutorial. So grab your yarn and your hook, and we want to make sure to leave a generous starting tail because we will be doing an invisible fasten off, or it's also called an invisible finish, at the very end of our hat. So you want to create a slip knot up higher on your yarn to leave a generous starting tail. So insert your hook. Make sure it is the same width as the the neck or throat of your crochet hook. And then you want to loosely chain 72 stitches to make the default adult size hat. So 72 chains should reach 20 inches, which is the length that you want for a head circumference of 22 inches. So loosely chain 72, and if you want to measure your chain to make sure that you're meeting the pattern gauge, grab your tape measure once you've done your chains, and then measure it out. So once you've reached 72 chains, we are going to begin row 1. And you'll notice that I refer to it as row 1 instead of round 1, because we're not going to actually join making it a round until after row 1. So after row 1, I will begin referring to them as rounds. So, and then the other thing to take note of is we're starting with 72 chains. However, when we complete row 1, you will have 71 stitches. And that's because we always, and this isn't just specific to this pattern, this is specific to crochet in general, where you always skip the first chain on closest to your hook. And so that's what gets you to 71 stitches. However, and I'll go over this later, once you complete row 1, we will be doing what's called an invisible join to turn it into a round. And that invisible join is a slip stitch. And because of the way the pattern is read, the pattern repeats for the brim is waistcoat stitch, slip stitch and back loop only, slip stitch and back loop only. So that invisible slip stitch join will count in the pattern repeat as that second slip stitch in the back loop only. So that will get our stitch count back to 72 stitches instead of 71. And I'll make sure to go over that when we reach that point. So, and also I recommend, usually the traditional crochet method is to crochet into your chain like this. But we are not going to be doing that. We're actually going to be crocheting into the back bumps of your chain. So the best way to, I'm going to loosen this so I can illustrate this a little bit clearer for you. So here is the front of our chain, and when we rotate it over, turn it over, this is the back of our chain. So these bumps here are where we're going to single crochet into. Now the easiest way to accomplish this is to not turn it over completely to the back. It's actually to hold it like this. So then you can see this is where we will insert our hook down into. So this back bump, that's where we will put our single crochet stitches. So once you reach 72 stitches, or however many you need to make the size that you wish, we are going to do a single crochet, not into the first back bump, because again, that's like, we're skipping that first chain. So not into, here's the first back bump. We want to crochet into the second chain back bump here. So insert your hook. And this is what it will look like. Yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Insert your hook into the next back bump, yarn over, pull up a loop, and again, loose tension is key for this pattern. So pull up your loop high, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Insert your hook to the back bump, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. And you're just going to keep doing this until we reach the end of the row. And just as a couple of notes, the reason why I wrote this pattern to single crochet into the back bumps instead of like the traditional, crochet method of crocheting into the top loop here of your chain, or, the chainless foundation method has become very popular as well, which I actually prefer that method usually. But for this pattern specifically, I like to use the back bump method when starting out because it helps set up your waistcoat stitches a lot easier. Okay, so we're coming up on the last 2 stitches here. So single crochet into that back bump, and then the last stitch, single crochet into that back bump. And this is what your chain in row 1 should look like now. And so now we are going to join the 2 ends here to make it into the round. So you want to grab your both ends, bring them together like this. And now we are going to go over how to do the invisible slip stitch join. I want to first cover how we usually do a slip stitch join in the round. That way it helps illustrate the differences. So usually you've finished your row, and to join we take the first stitch and we insert our hook into that first stitch, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through again. And then we usually then will chain 1 and stuff. That's the traditional way. The way that I want you to do this for this hat is because the invisible slip stitch join keeps the seam, it creates almost a nearly seamless hat because the seam is then hidden on the inside of the hat rather than running along the outside. So, how to do the invisible slip stitch join. So take your 2 ends here, and I like to hold them together. So I basically kind of put them together and then pinch the 2 ends together. And then what you want to do is you're going to insert your hook under both loops of that first stitch here. And instead of inserting it front to back, we're actually going to insert it from back to front, like this. And then just take your working loop and put it over the top of your hook, like so. And then once you have that, you'll pull it through. Now, to begin round 2, we are actually going to chain 1. And then we're going to actually begin round 2. And for the invisible slip stitch join, you just want to make sure that it's a little looser, which is perfectly fine because here you can see that slip stitch join. Because once we start our pattern repeat that we're going to do for the brim of the hat, that repeats from rounds 2 through 10, it will count as that second slip stitch in the repeat. So round 2 will begin the brim repeat for our hat. So it's going to go waistcoat stitch, back loop only slip stitch, back loop only slip stitch. So we're going to first do a waistcoat stitch and then do a slip stitch in the back loop only here and do another slip stitch in the back loop only. So let's begin. First, we're going to do our waistcoat stitch. And again, just to reiterate from earlier, the waistcoat stitch tutorial, the first row or round that you do of the waistcoat stitch is going to be a little tougher than the rest. And that's just because you're setting it up. Once you get into the waistcoat stitch, subsequent rounds after the first round or row, it is a lot easier. So waistcoat stitch, back loop only slip stitch, back loop only slip stitch. And now the waistcoat stitch again. And we just keep repeating this all the way around until we reach the last few stitches of the round. And one thing that I do just want to make note of, especially if you are new to this stitch, is stitch placement. That can be a little difficult here when you're new, especially when you are mixing the waistcoat stitch with other stitches within that same row or round. It can be a little difficult of, well, where do I place my hook? Because, for example, usually when you do a single crochet, you're just going under both loops here or under one loop, but this is where you're inserting your hook. So then it's easy for you to see, okay, this is where my single crochet is, so my slip stitch will be placed similarly here. But because the waistcoat stitch is, we insert our hook here, the question I get a lot is, well, do I insert my hook into here to do the slip stitch, or do I insert my hook into here to do the slip stitch? And the way you want to think about this is, so here we're going to do our waistcoat stitch. Okay, and so we just completed this stitch here. So you can see that these two loops here belong to this waistcoat stitch. So that's going to help you in determining where to place your stitches. So there's that. And then so this here is the next stitch, because if you think about it the way that we just pointed out, this is the waistcoat stitch, just for example purposes, and then here's the loops that it belongs to. So here we're going to insert our hook, back loop only slip stitch. Next one, back loop only slip stitch. And I will also I'm going to point out, because once we finish round 2, the rest of the rounds will look much different in terms of trying to figure out your stitch placement. It's actually a lot easier once you complete the first round or row of the waistcoat stitch. But overall in the pattern, we're on round 2. So it'll be a lot easier for you to see where to place your stitches. So really, you just got to power through the first round of the waistcoat stitch that you're doing here. So first round of the waistcoat stitch that we're doing, but second round overall in the pattern. So just keep doing the waistcoat stitch, slip stitch, repeat. And I will meet you back here at the towards the end of round 2, which is this round that we're working on. So we're back at towards the end of round 2. As you can see, we've got 2 stitches left in this round. So the next stitch we're ready for is a waistcoat stitch. And then in the 71st stitch, we are going to do a back loop only slip stitch. So insert your hook, yarn over, pull through. And then now we are going to do our invisible join to finish this round. And this invisible slip stitch join will count as our 72nd stitch. So remove your hook from your working loop, insert from back to front, pull your working loop over your hook again, pull through, and we finished round 2, chain 1 to begin round 3. And you can actually pull your, if you want to make that chain a little smaller, you can pull on your working loop and your hook to shrink that down. So now we are going to begin round 3, and this is where I want to point out the stitch placement, because it can get confusing for people, but I do find that it's a lot easier now because you just have to make sure that you're putting a waistcoat stitch into a waistcoat stitch and then a slip stitch into a slip stitch. So it should be a lot easier for you to see than round 2. So we've chained 1. Now we're going to do a waistcoat stitch into a waistcoat stitch here. And look how much easier that is because I had loose tension and a pointed hook. And once you do that first round of waistcoat stitches, it is so much easier to complete them. And then, like I was saying in the previous round, where do we put our slip stitches now? Does it go here, here, here? So if you'll remember what we were talking about previously, these 2 loops here belong to this waistcoat stitch. So we do a slip stitch here in the back loop only, remember. Another slip stitch in the back loop only. And now a waistcoat stitch into a waistcoat stitch. Remember to pull up your loop high for loose tension. Okay, let's do a few more together. Slip stitch, back loop only, slip stitch, back loop only, and again, remember loose tension is key. Now waistcoat stitch into a waistcoat stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop high, slip stitch, slip stitch, waistcoat stitch. And you're just going to keep doing this repeat and finishing each round with an invisible slip stitch join. And you're going to continue this until you've completed round 10. So I will meet you back here at round 10. Well, I'll meet you back here towards the end of round 10. Okay, so welcome back. We are coming up on the end of round 10. So waistcoat stitch, back loop only slip stitch, slip stitch, waistcoat, slip stitch, and then the invisible join. Okay, and then tighten that up just a little bit, chain 1, and now so for row 11 we are now going to just be regular single crocheting in each stitch. So this is row 11 that we are completing right now. And after row 10, so starting here with row 11, we are no longer going to be counting the invisible join as a stitch. it will not count towards the stitch count. And the reason for that is because we are no longer the repeat that we were doing before. So in rounds 1 through 10, we was the waistcoat stitch, slip stitch, slip stitch. And we will no longer be doing that repeat. So in row 11, our last stitch, so the last single crochet that we're going to do, we're actually going to put 2 single crochets in the last stitch. That way we're bringing our stitch count to 72. And I will show you what I mean once we get to the end here. So basically there's just going to be one increase in the last stitch in row 11. So here we are coming up at the end of row 11. So just keep doing our single crochets. Okay, and then right here, as you can see, this is our last stitch. This is the 71st stitch. So we're just going to go ahead and put 2 single crochets into that same stitch. So this is what it'll look like. There's, as you can see, 2 single crochets there. Now, we're still going to do the invisible join every single round, but we're just past the point of it will no longer count as a stitch in your round stitch count. Okay. And then chain 1. Okay, so we are about to start round 12. We have our invisible join and our chain 1 here. And in round 12, we are going to be crocheting into the back bar. And we're just doing a regular single crochet into the back bar of the previous round's stitches. So the easiest way to point this out and show you what I'm talking about, let me actually zoom in. Okay. This is the front loop, the back loop, and then the back bar. This right here, this is the back bar. So this. So that's what we are going to be crocheting into. So basically we'll have the, let's get our loop back on our hook. Okay. And turn it over. And then we are going to, so front loop, back loop, back bar. Sometimes it kind of helps just to use your nail to get into that stitch. Another good example of why for this pattern a pointy crochet hook is really helpful, because it just really helps you get in under that back bar. And this is all we're going to do for round 12. I will meet you back here when I get to the last few stitches of round 12. Okay, so we are coming up on the last few stitches of round 12 here. I really like using the back bar method here. It gives a really nice little accent to your crochet pieces. So it basically pushes the 2 loops forward. giving it a nice little border. I like using it for borders between sections. The little last stitch here can sometimes be a little difficult to see where the back bar is just because of how it works up in the round. So there's the front loop, back loop, and then we know that it's usually right there on the post. So right here. So let's get hook. There. Single crochet. Now, so count your stitches, make sure that there's 72, and do an invisible join, like we've been doing in every round so far. If you want to continue on with the same color here as you used for the brim, for the body of the hat, then that's fine, just keep going. But if you would like to use a second color, now is the time to change colors. So basically you're just going to tie off. So chain one and tie off and switch to your other color. For this, since it's a new section and this is where our seam is anyways, I'm just going to tie off, weave in my end later, and start the new color here. So now we're attaching our secondary color, if you choose to do that. This next round, round 13, we are going to start with our new color, and we're going to be doing the waistcoat stitch in every single stitch. So before, down here, we were doing the waistcoat stitch, slip stitch, slip stitch. Now we're starting to do the waistcoat stitch in every single stitch. And we're going to just keep repeating that for quite a few rounds, and then we will start decreasing. So get started here. Yarn over, pull through, have 2 loops, 3 now, pull through the 2 loops, okay, and next waistcoat stitch. Again, this is why it's just so important to have loose tension when working this stitch, so you can easily get your hook in there. Because if you have really tight stitches, you're going to have to like push and use a lot of force to get it through. And eventually your hands are going to get tired and sore, and you're going to get frustrated. So, and the other thing too to keep in mind with the waistcoat stitch is the first row or round of doing the waistcoat stitch is always going to be a little bit tougher than the subsequent rows, because we are basically turning these single crochet stitches, we're putting a waistcoat stitch into there. Whereas, as you'll see in round 14, I'll make sure to point this out too, you're going to be putting a waistcoat stitch into a waistcoat stitch. So it's already easier to do. So really, once you get through this row, and as long as you have loose tension and a pointy crochet hook, you should be able to really kind of get into a groove and fly through the rounds, the repeat rounds of just the waistcoat stitch. I know a lot of people don't really care for this stitch because of how tight the stitch is, so it can be a little difficult to work into. And also people don't like, it's a very short stitch, so it takes longer to work up, which I think is kind of fitting, actually, because knitting for me, and this just could be because I'm a very novice knitter. I just learned to knit this year. So I've been a crocheter since I was a kid, but just learned to knit. But knitting takes a lot longer to me than crochet, and that could just be experience. But I've also heard from other knitters and crocheters who do both that knitting typically takes longer. So I think it's only fitting that the crochet stitch that looks like knitting takes longer. It's kind of fitting. So, but I really do love the waistcoat stitch for the look, but also there are practical reasons to use the waistcoat stitch because it produces a much tighter and denser fabric. So things that would be great for the waistcoat stitch are mittens, pot holders. If you live in a very cold climate and you want a crochet hat that's not, got lacy or, open stitches, this will definitely keep you extremely warm. And the other thing too is, I'm autistic and ADHD, so I love the instant gratification of finishing a project. So I totally get the impatience that comes with this stitch. So in addition to having loose tension and a pointed crochet hook, another good tip is if you can, or if you want to, use bulky or chunky yarn, and it'll work up a lot quicker. So that's also another way that you can use this stitch, but get it to work up quicker. All right, so just keep going with round 13 here, and I will see you on the very last few stitches of round 13. So here we are coming up on the last couple stitches of round 13. So let's just do our last couple waistcoat stitches. And then before you do the invisible join, you just want to go ahead and make sure and count your stitches. Make sure that you still have got 72 or however many your size that you're crocheting needs. I'm not going to lie, I don't count every single row. I know I should, but I definitely do on rows that either have something that's changing or switching to a different section of the pattern, that kind of a thing. So from here through round 28, we are going to just be doing the waistcoat stitch all around. And I will meet you back here towards the end of round 28. Welcome back. We're going to start round 28. Round 28 is the first round where we're going to start having our decreases. So for round 28, we follow the same repeat. It's going to be 4 waistcoat stitches and then a decrease. Now, the decreases are not going to be your typical single crochet decreases. They're going to be a waistcoat decrease. So let's go ahead. So first we're going to do 4 normal waistcoat stitches. And now we're going to do our first decrease, which will be in these 2 stitches here. So insert your hook into the first decrease stitch and insert it as if you're going to do a normal waistcoat stitch. So insert it through the V, pull up a loop. You've got 2 loops on your hook now. Now insert your hook into the second decrease stitch, just like you would if you were going to do a normal waistcoat stitch, and pull up a loop. So now you should have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. And that is what it will look like. So just keep up this same repeat of 4 waistcoat stitches, 1 decrease, all the way around, and I will meet you back here for round 29. Okay, so we just finished our first round of decreases, and so now I would like to show you, well, if you are following the regular pattern, it is round 29. And I want to just show you where to place your hook when you're crocheting into a waistcoat stitch decrease, because it's not always very clear. So let's just go ahead, and this round 29, it's just waistcoat stitches all around. So just doing normal waistcoat stitches here. And we're coming up on our first decrease. So here is our first waistcoat stitch decrease. Now, I find that it's helpful to kind of lift the yarn up, move it out of the way, so then you can get a better view. So basically we're wanting to go in between, in the middle of both of these V's. So right there, that's where we want to put our hook. So, and sometimes it helps to like wiggle your hook, and then you can get a better feel for where to put your hook. But again, this is why it's very important to have loose tension, because when you have the tight tension on a decrease and then you subsequently try to waistcoat stitch into it, it is very difficult if you do not have a loose tension. So I'm also going to do our little trick here of turning the work over to make sure my hook is inserted into the right spot. I see that it is, so yarn over, pull up a loop. Again, pull up high for loose tension, yarn over, pull through 2. And then let's just go into the next one. So this is what it looks like. So keep doing this all around and continue on with the rest of your decrease and regular waistcoat stitch rounds. And I will meet you back here towards the end so we can finish up the hat together. So we're ready to start our all decrease rounds. So where we're doing a decrease in every stitch. So let's, we are now ready for round 37. and we will be decreasing all the way around. And then round 38 will just be the waistcoat stitch all the way around. So I will meet you back here at round 39. So here we are ready to start round 39. This is the last official round of our hat, and we're just going to be doing decreases all the way around. And then once we have finished that, we will tie off and leave a generous tail, and then we'll cover how to close it up using a tapestry needle. So let's just go ahead and get started on the last couple decreases here. And these stitches will be a little tougher to work into. That's just the nature of once you get to a decreased spot like this. And kind of honestly, once you get to this point, you do want it to be a little tighter. So it might be a little tougher to work into this last round, but that's okay. So here we're going to do our final decrease stitch. And then do our final invisible slip stitch join. Oops, there we go. And then you're going to want to chain one because we're going to use this to tie off. And if you are attaching a pom-pom, you want to leave a very generous tail, a much longer tail than if you don't plan to use a pom-pom. I always err on the side of caution, leave a longer tail than what you think, because it's better to have a longer tail just in case. So here at the end of round 39, you should have 6 stitches remaining. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then our little tie off slip stitch here. And so now we are going to thread our tapestry needle. So now, to close up the hole here at the top, we are going to work just through the front loop of each stitch. So if you're familiar with amigurumi, that's kind of, that's a common method for closing up amigurumi or crochet plushies. So we're kind of using that same method here. So again, just through the front loop. So we're not going under both, and we're not going under the back, just the front loop here. And you don't have to pull it tight after each stitch. We'll do that at the end and you'll see it close up, which is also a really fun part of this. It's a nice end to your project to see that. And the last one, oops. Okay, and then now we are going to pull. So this is what it looks like now. And what you want to do is thread it. I like to, let me zoom out a little bit here. I like to put my hands through there. That way it's easier for me to grab the needle and stuff. So here, now that we've went through the last loop and we've pulled this tight, we want to put our needle through the middle part there and pull it through the bottom. And then from here, you just want to weave in your ends and tie off. However, at this point, if you're wanting to attach a pom-pom, you will leave this tail like this and use this tail to then attach the pom-pom. So now that we've closed up our beanie and we've pulled our tail through the bottom of the hat, you may want to attach a pom-pom. However, I do just want to address these holes right here. Depending on your tension and everything, sometimes these holes can appear larger than what they otherwise would. In other iterations of the hat, I have not had holes that are this large. But you can, if this bothers you, or, you know, if you're not attaching, you know, if you're attaching a pom-pom, those holes aren't really as big of a deal because you're going to be attaching the pom-pom that right there. However, if you're not attaching a pom-pom and those holes bother you, you can use your thread and needle to, and this is also, again, why it's important to have a longer tail than you anticipate. You can use your thread and needle here to cinch those up as well. Okay, so the final piece of finishing that we need to do, regardless of the size of a hat or the type of hat you're making, is this starting tail. If you'll remember, we did our chain and then row 1 and then we joined. So that's why there's this little gap here. And I just prefer that for beginners just because it's a lot easier than having to worry about twisting your chain and everything like that. Plus, it's just such an easy join. It's called the invisible join. And I actually learned this method not for using with garments or anything, but with actually finishing granny squares. I believe Hooked by Robin, she's the one, I believe, who the tutorial I watched, it was how to finish your granny squares with an invisible like join. So, or how to finish, it was like an invisible finish for granny squares. Great tutorial, would highly recommend it, but it got me to thinking that that would be a great idea to use here. So basically what you do is, so you thread your needle, and then we're viewing the inside out of the hat. This is the inside, and here's the outside, or right side, wrong side. So here, you see where your tail is. You want to go to the first stitch, which is right here. Not this. This is our chain 1. Ignore that. So this is where we're going to insert our needle under both loops. So insert your needle here under both loops, pull it through, and then we're going to come down this way into that first stitch. And we kind of want to run it along the inside here. And then pull it tight. And basically what we're doing is we're creating a like faux or mock little stitch there. And then you'll just want to secure it with a little knot and then weave in the remainder of your tail. This is what your join looks like. So here I'm just going to cover how to do the surface crochet along the bottom brim of the hat. And this can be used to just reinforce it, so give it a little more durability here. And also if you find that you think that your brim is a little too loose or something, or it's stretchier than what you would like, it's helpful to have this in your back pocket, and you can just kind of reinforce the brim of your hat. Or it's also just nice for aesthetics to match this edging. So I'm actually going to use a contrasting color here, just so you can see what the edging would look like. In other iterations, I use the same color as the brim, but I think it's kind of fun to mix it up and also show you what using the body of the hat color looks like here. So you want to start where your seam was, because that's going to be the back of the hat. Also, just to keep everything consistent. So since we did the invisible join, it's kind of, you know, you kind of have to look for where it is. I don't like to start exactly there because I don't want it to become like bumpy. So I actually start like a stitch or two to the left or right of that. Doesn't really matter. And essentially what we're going to be doing, here, let me zoom in. So what we're going to be doing is you do a slip knot on your hook, and each of these loops, the front loops here, we're just going to be doing a slip stitch all the way around. That's it. And then we'll weave in our end. So what you want to do is have your hook and your slip stitch, and I find that it can be easier to do it like upside down like this, or even to the side. It's really just a matter of personal preference, however you want to hold it. So here, this is how we're going to get started. So underneath both loops, yarn over, and you want to make sure you're pulling up to give yourself a consistent tension. Okay, so pull through. So again, another slip stitch in the next stitch here. So underneath both loops, yarn over, pull through, and pull up, pull through. And you'll be able to start to see the edging take shape. Now, if it looks a little wonky at first, that's okay. Don't panic, because it will look that way until we get done. And then, so here's the invisible join stitch. It can be a little difficult to get through this one because you want to be mindful of the knot. Just go over though, avoid that. So I put in my hook in to the right of that. And just keep doing this all the way around. And I will meet you back here at the end to go over how to finish it off and weave in your ends. Okay, so we're coming up here on the last couple slip stitches that we're going to do. So here we go. Okay, so this is the last stitch. This was our first stitch. And basically what we're going to do is just create a, pull your yarn through, and we're going to snip our yarn. Generally, a good rule of thumb is a 6-inch yarn tail. I have found and learned by experience that I like to have a longer yarn tail, because it just makes things easier in case something happens and you need to have a longer tail. It just makes your life a lot easier. So here we just pulled through the last stitch, but I pulled it a little too tight. So you just want to, if this happens, you can just take your needle and kind of fluff up that last stitch. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to thread this tail, and we're going to kind of do exactly what we did for the starter tail and kind of do the invisible end, and then we tie it off and weave in our end. So we're going to basically do the exact same thing that we were doing. I also like to make sure this starting chain is usually always loose. So I like to make it a little tighter by pulling on it. And then I actually weave that through the back as well to make sure that it's lined up with the rest of the stitches. And also then it will help hide that knot. So I'm gonna go under those 2 loops and pull it through there. And then we're going to take our ending tail, thread our needle, and basically do the same type of thing that we were doing. So there. And then I actually kind of like to go through that knot just to secure it. Pull it through. And then we have our starting and ending tail. And I like to do this just to secure it. I just do 1 little knot and then I will weave in the ends. Congrats on finishing the Thanks It's Crochet hat. Make sure to tag me and share your makes on Instagram. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to pick up your ad-free PDF version of the Thanks It's Crochet hat pattern. It also covers how to do the chunky size adult hat version here, like I'm wearing, and baby, toddler, and child sizes. If you'd like to support NeuroStitches, please like and subscribe or buy me a coffee. Everything goes into supporting and keeping NeuroStitches free and open to everyone. NeuroStitches is a peer support community connecting neurodivergent individuals through fiber arts. So thank you so much for your support and happy stitching.